Hi, this is Adam Asnes, and thank you for joining the webinar today. We're going to talk specifically about localization and developers and the special needs of developers in particular, because it's different when you deal with developers. We'll go into why, the how to optimize that, and various tools, of course, that make that happen, practices, and the like. So what we're going to show you today, some of it should actually look pretty innovative. That's my hope. And again, as I mentioned, use the questions interface. If you have questions, just write them down and we'll address those at the end of the webinar. I have with me a special guest, Olivier, if you would turn your camera back on. Very good. That's Olivier Libouban. He runs our product development. He's going to show things later in the webinar. We'll do some, not just PowerPoint, but or actually Google Slides, but we'll be doing some more live on the screen work as well. All right, with that, let's get to our subject matter. And there we go. All right, so I mentioned the developer needs are different than a lot of localization needs within the organization. There is, I mean, this isn't necessarily unique to development, but you have constant change with many, many contributors and stakeholders part of that constant change. So it's not just a marketing department, it's a whole development department. That development department could be anywhere from 5 engineers on a project to 500 or even more. So there's a lot of input happening regularly. There's a real dynamic nature, and the systems in place are really capital to how you're going to deliver things. Just, you know, if you think of, let's say, a marketing project for a website that maybe uses Adobe Experience Manager, that data, that content is always going to come in one way. And with software, it comes at you in all kinds of ways, every which way, on formats and the like. And these are just some of the needs. So you have, I mentioned complex systems, file formatting challenges. You know, in a word, you know, JSON files or XAML files can be a bit of the Wild West. There is no standard way those files will come in. For example, you have a lot of concurrent issues going on. If you are, say, a one product company, let's say that's a SaaS group, you might have, I mean, we have some SaaS customers with upwards of 400 repos that are being simultaneously monitored for localization changes. Or it might be 2 or 3, but the rate of change happens quickly. Now, when you put yourself in the enterprise, a software-oriented enterprise or technology-oriented enterprise, now you have, you know, potentially up to 1,000 or more teams of products. And then you also have the idea that the notion of a product is sort of going away in software architecture. We'll talk about that a little bit too. Your cost of time is very paramount. I will say that often the localization budget doesn't actually reflect that, but the engineering budgets do in terms of tooling and money and what they do. Engineering budget, they might, I just had a conversation with somebody in Europe this morning where she was like, yeah, my localization budget is like, well, yeah, here's what translation costs, and the time is like another thing. And there's risk. There's an inherent risk of localization is that the cost of being late or lousy is fairly high. Late in that you're putting off quarters of planned revenue. Lousy as in maybe you're giving some locales a poor user experience compared to your, you know, I'll use US English as, you know, sort of the dominant first locale that people are talking about. So anyway, you know all that. I wanted to relate some stories early on. Okay, I already talked about hundreds of products, repositories, and teams. That's actually pretty common among Lingoport's customer base. We service some very large enterprises, as well as what I'll call companies that are built around a single chief product, but that single product might be actually quite complex. You often see, you rarely have just one UI these days. There'll be like, the browser-based user interface, the mobile one, possibly a desktop interface. There may be distributed clients that are gathering data, all kinds of interesting ways. I mentioned that the notion of distinct product teams are kind of, in many places, it's not ubiquitous at all, but in many places, that notion is going away, where what happens is that products are assemblies of various different components or functions for a product. Here's the admin function, here's the currency function, here's the shopping cart, whatever it may be. But they're built into a microservices architecture versus, a product that works on the XYZ product. Those products are made of these microservices components that are assembled in different ways for all the company's products. That sort of makes, the reason why that's important is you have additional complication, you have additional fragmentation going on within your team that the localization team has to deal with. So you have this decentralization of developers, possibly even spread all over the world, working on lots of different things at the same time, but a centralized localization team often that has to be responsible for everything. Sometimes you see that broken up a little bit, but still, you pretty much always see localization teams responsible for multiple development teams, even if those multiple development teams work on a single product. You want to have, in terms of victory, in terms of positive stories, there's a really great presentation that Yuka Kurihara gave for Loquworld. It's on our blog somewhere. I can even include that in a follow email. But she gave it at Loquworld, and what she was saying is, wow, using some of the products that we have, she had a problem show up. So she needed to get a localization project going out, but she had a critical error with a file. And she was able to see it in real time very quickly and point the developer at exactly where that problem was in the file. I think in that case, it was a duplicate string ID, or something like that. And tell the developer, literally over Slack, and point them at where the error was, and then they could immediately make the fix. And boom, they were ready to run their localization job. So turnaround in minutes in terms of correction. But also, we've seen customers that, one of them gave another webinar, talked about how he was getting a 7-time improvement in his speed simply through automation that we were providing, because localization, in his words, had become as simple as like turning on a light switch. Everything happened automatically. By nature of the interactive reporting, the developers got better at what they were doing. His localization teams always had very clean data that they were working in. If there was a problem, they could nip that problem in the bud very, very quickly. And so he was seeing all of this productivity increase that he actually measured and presented to his superiors. And that's good for him, of course, but good for us too. It's always, I got this email like 2 weeks ago. It was from one of our customers. It was like, it's always a missing curly bracket, or it's always a duplicate string ID. There are common issues that show up and they gum up the work. Another really common one is like a file gets sent, somebody opens the file, makes a minor change, saves it, forgets that they're saving it in the wrong encoding, and then when it goes to the database, it corrupts characters and nobody knows where that is. Like, those are the kinds of things, those are the kinds of stories that, like, they don't happen a lot, but when they happen, they can create larger fire drills later on because everybody's like, what is causing this? What's happening here? And the last story is transforms. And by that, I mean, the data comes in, the content that needs to be translated comes in a file that you go, where did they come up with this format? How am I going to get this into my TMS? How are my translators going to work with this? Because now I have to spend time transforming that into something else. And then when I get it back, I have to transform it back again to get it back into the repository. Because again, if you put it back in the wrong format, you're going to break somebody's code, and we never want to break the code. Especially, you don't want localization getting that finger pointed at you. So transforms are a real issue, and they pretty much happen everywhere we go. They're needed. So they're really underrated and really important. All right, so let's get into this developer's world around localization. For some of you, this is going to seem kind of rudimentary, but a lot of localization people actually come from a background of studying a language in college, or linguistics, or project management, some mixture of the two, and less from the software development side. So I always feel like it's important to talk about, like, I use terms like what's a repo or repository, and it's really pretty simple. It's a container for your source code, and as a developer, what matters to you is what's in the repository, because that's the truth of where your software is at. That's what you're going to test against. That's what you're going to build against. That's what you're going to deploy in the world. Nowhere in the developer's world does the initials TMS ever come up. And please don't mistake, I'm not bashing TMSs. They're great, right? But for the developer world, it's all about the repository. And if you think about it, this is how it works. It's a very nice, simple diagram. Imagine this, but much, much deeper vertically. There's a master in most companies, right? So you have a master, and that is where the master copy of the source code is. And developers pull off and they start to work on that code base to add their features. They go and they write their little whatever they're working on, or bug fixes, or whatever it may be, or new widgets in the UI. And then they merge it back in with the repository. And that's going on in multiple places. And that's the dynamic nature of these things. And usually when it comes to localization, enough of this goes on, and you say, okay, I'm going to localize. And sometimes it's weeks late. So you might say, well, we've been working on this, but because I have minimums, or because I have whatever constraints around processing the data, I'm going to only localize quarterly, or maybe twice a year. And again, when we do that because we have to. But when you really think about it, you're robbing global users of the same user experience that's constantly being updated. So it's not really desirable. It's a matter of necessity, right? Again, when we think about developers, they're used to this continuous integration. That's their work being merged. The builds are going to be checking, making sure first that they don't break something. That's important, and it's a little embarrassing if you break something, because you're supposed to be at least unit testing your work before you merge it back. And you also should be measuring other things, like guaranteed your company has scanners for security and for coding quality aspects of how people write stuff. There's usually also a review process where developers review one another's code, and integrated tests. And by that, I mean, like, as you are writing new functionality, you're also thinking about, how am I going to test? How am I going to demonstrate that this works and test that it works? That has to be into the mechanism of how you develop. Nowhere there is, how am I going to test the localization? And we'd like to change that. We'll talk about that a little bit. Now, the expectation for the developer, what they'd really like, is something I'm going to call task. That's not a real word, term. A client used it and I stole it. But that's translation as a service. So what they really want to do is just like they automatically check stuff and they have all this automatic stuff going on against their repositories, they want to have a translation system, send out the files and they come back instantly, just like their other checks that happen. They want the testing criteria to be set up and staged so that can happen automatically. So we'll talk about those things as the presentation continues. All right, so when we connect, I come up against this a lot. Okay, I bought a TMS, it has a Git connector. Why do I need, say, our localizer software? The reason is that there's a lot more to it than just a Git connector. Git connector opens up, says, hey, what's changed? It doesn't necessarily automatically detect additions to the repository. It doesn't detect a whole lot of other things that you need to have there to really run an enterprise development organization around localization. So for instance, Localizer, which I don't have a logo up here, but it's automatically checking the repo and pulling out content that needs to be translated and doing all these things that I'm talking about here. That's what the software does. It has Git connection, but that's just a little part of it, an important part of it. So it has over 40 automated checks. I forget whether it's 41 or 43, but these are checks on the files for both critical issues that should actually stop the assembly line and minor issues that you can easily correct, right? That should be corrected, but they don't necessarily have to stop the production. But you want to indicate exactly where that issue is in the code rather than just saying there's an issue. So Globalizer does that, of course. So there's like a screen capture from one of our dashboards. It has metrics of like, here's the latest one, this is late, this is not late. Here are the issues. I'm going to drill down to them. I can click on a button. You can see this one is at 0. That's lovely. But had there been an issue, it would be hyperlinked and you could click on it, would take you right to the issue. There's also something that I'll show a picture of. A picture is easier than describing it. Automated pseudo localization, so the developers can always visually see the product of what they're doing, that it's not broken. We have file synchronization. This is like, hey, I updated this file, but the Italian hasn't come back yet, but the French has. Ordinarily, somebody might wait till it all comes back, but Localizer handles all that. And even if there's been a change after this file came back, it'll all synchronize and even out. So you just don't have to worry about it. Any last minute string changes are like no problem. Localizer will detect that, send out the delta, and that's all smooth. And again, synchronize the results as they come in. If some translations come back before others, it's just like not a problem. It just moves on and handles that. Another really cool thing is integrating with Slack and Teams. Your developers, they communicate with Slack and Teams. Your localization group probably is also on Slack and Teams, but your data is not. Well, what if you could control the whole localization process through Slack or Teams, through messaging? That's where people live anyway. So we have this thing called LingoBot that does that. I probably have like one slide showing that. I mentioned transforms. Onboarding should be super fast. You got a new team, you want to onboard, no problem. You got a locale you want to add, boom, it's really quick, no problem. It's not, some protracted thing. And context, you want to pass the human translator context. Well, we got that. We can actually capture that and send it, not depending upon a developer to create a screenshot, not depending upon a developer to describe how a dialogue is being used. It just happens automatically. it's collected automatically. So that's really cool. And then finally, when it comes to actually linguistic testing, so you've got your localization in place, you test, right? Your linguistic review goes through, and let's say they find a word and they just don't like how it's being translated there. The usual kind of workflow is, okay, I'm going to take a screenshot, I'm going to circle it, I'm going to file it, a bug in Jira. Somebody has to assign it, somebody goes through, somebody changes it, but the problem is that they got to find all the places where that might be. It's maybe not obvious. Suddenly you have this one word change and it takes 3 months to 3 years to actually happen. That is a common scenario. So we made it very simple because we live in the repo where the developers live. We can map where things are, and we'll show you a little bit more about that. And that means we can make updates quick. So just some quick examples. Here's a critical error. It's being pointed out from the dashboard. And this way, the developer knows exactly where it is. You can assign it. You can do all these cool things. Transform, here we have just an example of a transform that has to happen with one data type turning into another. Olivier will talk about that more too. Don't want to steal his thunder. And here's just a screenshot that Olivier sent me of a query going on in Slack of translation status, for instance. You can see it's not done. There's 8 files remaining. There's 113 keys, so segments that need to be translated, and that's the total amount of words. So this kind of status, or cloning a project, like you're creating this new thing, and you want to remember the developers going off and doing their thing, and they want to clone a project so that their branch is covered, for instance. You can do that right in Slack. Boom, it's a couple of commands and they're done. I also mentioned pseudo localization. This is a case where a picture is better than me talking about it. You're using, what you're doing is taking every string and you're adding an opening, so a character that shows where it starts and ends, and you're expanding it, plus adding things like diacritics and Unicode characters to ensure that you don't get like ugly character corruption issues coming up. So, of course, we sell Globalizer that scans for internationalization issues, but problems still happen. And so it's important that what Localizer does is it creates this continuous pseudo-localization. So as soon as something changes, it gets pseudo-localized. And a developer can see, hey, on my branch on this feature, I know that if I toggle, if I have to support all these languages, that visually I can see that my expansion is going to be supported, my characters are supported, and where's this coming from? This is in English. It doesn't have any pads around it. Could it be that this is an embedded string? Concatenations would show up. Here you see that it's expanding, but it didn't quite make it. The closing bracket isn't here, right? And here you can see this is being fed from another area, in this case, a database, and it also isn't pseudo-localized. So that means, hey, do I have to look there? This isn't done. Place lived isn't pseudo-localized, but this is, but it's incomplete. So you're learning things about your UI real time with visual feedback, and that's an essential part of the whole Agile manifesto, is that you can get the feedback so you can adapt your work instead of waiting for this golden moment after translation, or maybe a testing moment after the developers have already moved on. Those are expensive times to fix things. Because remember, even outside of the time it takes to fix, if a developer has moved on to another project and you're telling them, hey, this pseudo-localization looks bad, I want you to open up that project you were working on last week and fix this. It's like, yeah, sure, I can do it, but now I have to stop what I'm doing and move back here and do it. So that's that's an impact on velocity, something that, you know, localization might not be measured on, but I can tell you those developers, they are measured on the velocity of how they get things fixed. So the other thing about pseudo-localization is you don't have to speak whatever the target languages are, just it's English readable, so you're good. All right, I mentioned in context support. This is an example of showing a picture from an application in a translation workbench. I won't name which one it is, but the idea is the translator actually sees the words that they're going to be working with and the use case. And then finally, linguistic review, which I mentioned earlier, and that is you can go through the, you know, this is that same Rebel Outfitters application, and you can, you know, say, click on a word and say, hey, I don't like that. And you can, here's the word checkout it's probably really hard to make that out on the screen, but the word checkout was the current word, and we wanted this word instead, and we retrieved the key, put it in there, and once it's approved, this is really cool. Instead of having the whole sort of train of JIRA reports and the like, once it's approved, you're good to go. You just hit a button and it writes all the way back to the repo and makes the update. You don't even need any developers to help you out there. So with that, I have a couple of more things. I'm talking too long. Think of this as a workflow system. You are going from the repo to either human translation or machine translation. You may go like this, machine translation to human. You may go machine to repo, to machine to repo, to machine to repo, and then have a human process. That's something that we support. We don't do it with every TMS, but there are those that we do it. So you can have a human review the machine translations. The advantage here is that you just don't care how many times the strings change. There's no minimum charge from machine translation. You're just immediately updating, and you get an earlier chance to actually review translations and the like if you use that mechanism. The other thing is that chances are your human translation is using the first machine translation pass anyway. You can do this machine through the TMS, by the way, but the idea is that the machines can be part of that solution. And if the machines are the solution and you can edit whatever feature you're working on very quickly, well, it might be that this is where the human interface needs to be in testing, in the linguistics, doing the review. It's a different way to think about it, but I'm going to plant it in your mind. It's not for everybody. Not everybody's comfortable with that. It probably means a change in your workflow, but it is possible, and that will affect your speed in a very positive manner, and your costs your costs will go down because you're getting that linguistic review anyway. And as you do those reviews, those corrections go back into your translation memory or the corpus of your machine translation. So you can see there's a lot of ways that we support doing this. The options are yours. It's kind of very cool and very new as the machines get better. All right, I've talked too long. Sorry, Olivier, I'm gonna let you take over and show and tell. This is a good chance as we change screens. This is a good chance to I'm giving control to Olivier. This is a good chance to write down any questions you might have.
Do you see my screen?
Yes, I do.
Can you hear me, Adam?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
I'm going to mute myself, though.
Okay, so hi, I'm Olivier, and I drive product development at Lingoports. I'm going to touch on a few things on our products, not the whole product suite, because it's pretty extensive, actually. But I'm going to reiterate some of the points that Adam made during his presentation. I'm going to kill my camera, then I've seen my mug, and we're going to go over on this side here. So the very first thing is, if you go to lingoport.com here, you can go to products and localizer. There is also globalizer, localizer QA, which may be interesting, and something even more like a marketplace application for GitHub stuff. I just want to go over here just to give you an overview of what happens when people push files to the repository. They typically push files in ENUS for this side of the country here, and then that is automatically analyzed by localizer, and it may be checked for goodness. If it's all good, it may be sent for a TMS or machine translation, as I mentioned. And it may be sent many times. It doesn't have to return right away, like I mentioned, in terms of what we call sequencing, meaning sending a set of files at T0, sending another set of files at T1, at T2. You can return those in whichever order you want, in French, Japanese, or Chinese, or whichever locale you have set up. And provided they check properly, they will be pushed to the repo in the right branch, the right location, the right path, the right file, the right key. And we make sure that things are totally seamless for developers. So just I wanted to bring that picture before I start moving on to something else here. Here is something called Family Search, which is a genealogy application on the web. You can see it's in French right here. I'm going to just change to a few locales here, like Japanese or Korean or whichever is of interest to you, maybe German. This is all supported by Lingoport. So I just wanted to show, first of all, what the repository I'm going to talk about are underpinning. They're underpinning this application. And this application is actually, there's quite a bit of functionality here. There are a few hundreds of engineers who work on this. And there are a few hundreds of repositories that need to have some localization happen to them. Not all the repos, but a good amount of repositories. Here is how we've onboarded this project. There are 261 projects or 261 repositories if you want. And it goes for some very small repositories to very large repositories. And there are a number of them, just a few of them. And I could scroll down and show more. And so you first get a sense at the very high level which repositories are doing just fine. They're 100% complete. But maybe you have your own repositories that you are more interested in. Maybe you have 6 projects that you are managing for one part of the application, maybe searching, or maybe the home page, or maybe some specific genealogy functionality. And here I have a few things that are around one part of the application, and also one part that's a mobile side of the application. So if I go to mobile here, you notice that the localizer average complete is 99%, and it corresponds to a repository here. I'm going to click here, and it's going to take you to a more detailed summary of where we stand in terms of completeness of translations. Right now, there is one file. It's this file here, source main res value strings.xml, which is typical of Android files, by the way. And this one file has 2 keys or 2 strings, if you want, that need to be translated, and for 18 words. And that's from Bulgarian down to a few more locales, including 2 versions of Chinese, Vietnamese, and so on. So this tells you you're not quite 100% translated. You're pretty close, but you're 99% translated. So you could actually deploy it with this knowledge that you're 99% complete, or you want to have 100% complete. If you wanted to send the files to be translated, you would click this button here. That's all you'd have to do. So there are different ways to trigger how to send things. You can automate that completely, but people tend also to want to have a certain number of strings to be translated before they send them. Sometimes they want more control over their translation process. The person who is going to go to this dashboard here and click the button, that's the name, click the button, will be typically a program manager or project manager who oversees a number of developers and a number of teams. And so what you can see here, it's been done 356 times. So you don't want at the 17th time some error to occur in the system that's going to break the bill, have some unintended impact in Japanese or in French because a parameter is not being filled, or because you're taking the following line as part of the line to be translated, or some other weirdness, duplicate keys like Adam was saying. So 256 times, you know that this is working all the time pretty much. This is going every week, sometimes every 2 days, just depends on what they need on their end. This has 12,000 words to be translated. And if you remember from the beginning, there are 261 repositories that are currently onboarded. And that changes, by the way, all the time. Sometimes a new repo is added, 2 new repos, 5 new repos. Sometimes 5 locales are added. That's really typical, and that takes a few minutes. Sometimes the repository is de-onboarded because it's not something that's actual anymore. So all that is, of course, handled by this. I'm going to take another one here home, which is of a different type of files. This one are JSON files that are in the form file name _en.json in that instance. And so you see that this one has 2 files that need to be sent for translation, but out of those 2 files, we don't send everything is in those 2 files. We only send 12 key value pairs. There are 12 keys and 124 values, pretty much, or words really. And that's out of 47 files. It has been sent back and forth 173 files, 3 times, sorry. And it has 11,000 words, plus or minus some more. This one is 98% complete. So again, if you want to send it, you click here. If anything is in translation, meaning being processed by TMS, by a set of translators, you would see that here. Right now, everything that needed to be translated were finished. And so you can see that you're very clean in terms of all the translations are back, and also there are no translation issues here. So everything is copacetic. So the very first thing is you get a status of your repository here, which corresponds to all those functionality. At a very quick glance, you can send files back and forth. And if there are any errors, and it was hard for me to find an error because they've been working with this system for many years. I think it's 7 or 8 years now. And so at the beginning, there may have been some issues that they were not really aware of that we were catching, but now it's nearly impossible for them to have issues because they are so well trained, I'm going to say, by the system itself. But I found one here, which is an import kit failure. You see it's for this particular one here, and it's the 4th time it was sent, so that may be one of the reasons. And here typically you have the reason for why this was an error. So if you notice, this was on June 21st at 1:04 p.m. This was corrected on June 21st at 3:04 p.m. because of the previous message. This message told them what is the error, and by the way, the error was an ICU message format. I can show you that. It's going to be interesting, maybe. Here we go. So you can see that there is a missing plural rules for the specific locale SK, and in ICU message format, you need to have those selectors in the ICU message format. You need to have few, many, one, other, and they only had one and other. And so they know exactly where it is. It's at line 3. It's in this file. You need to resend that file, and you need to include those. So it's super precise in terms of the error. And so because of that precision, they are getting an error message that's super indicative, and so they are able to fix that really quickly. I mean, it was really within a couple hours on the same day, and somebody doing this particular locale here doing this. So on the error, this one, I'm going to close this here. I'm going to go back here. On this error, nothing was pushed to the repo. On that correction, things are successful, meaning there are no more errors in the files that are being translated. The files are pushed to the repo in the right repo, the right branch, the right directory, the right file, the right string. So everything is super precise there also. That's one of the main things that you want to have an automated process where errors will be caught and will be corrected as part of the automated process, not somewhere down the line when it's been deployed at your clients, for example. When we looked at the slide earlier that Adam had there, this is how a developer error is shown, meaning by that, this is not from translation. This is something that prevents a file from being sent to translation. The reason for that is that if you have a file that has a bad format on the TMS, you will not be able to actually parse that file and get the key value pairs, so the segments, if you want, to be translated. So in this instance, the creation of the file, it was a JSON file, kind of had an error, and in order for the developer to know what that is, they click on the red and they go there directly. Now it's fixed, so I cannot show that to you anymore because it's been fixed. But what happens, it's at line 183, right here, line 183, this key value pair is missing a comma at the end. So you see in JSON here, you need to have a comma at the end, unless it's the last line of a block. It's a little specific, but that's the way it is, right? And so they actually added a string just at 184 in that instance, and they forgot to add the comma at the end of that string, which is, it doesn't look like anything, but it's an error that is going to create a problem downstream. And you don't want to have 70 locales with this file to be translated with an error, 70 people being hung up on this. So what happens here is that the developers are notified. The strings cannot be sent to translation. You can see that, a critical error preventing a translation being sent. So they cannot click the button to send the files to be translated. And as long as the developer has not modified that and corrected that, it will be in that state. As soon as that's corrected, it will be back to what you've seen before in the dashboard. So that's the kind of very precise kind of handling that you need to do in order to have, again, something that's very automated, with a high velocity. Everything is really has a strong tension, I want to say, in between development and localization. It needs to work every time. I just want to show an example of Slack that I mentioned a little bit earlier. This is a Slack, an old Slack session, if you want, talking to Lingobot, which is itself talking to a set of projects that have been onboarded. And I just want to see the projects that are currently on that system, on that particular system, which is not the one we were looking at earlier. So it says that I have an Android City Smart iOS, I have those. And for each one of them, the types. So we have more than localizer, we also have globalizer. We have another product that does scanning of the code for internationalization issues. Here it's indicated by this type here. It's a parent project, meaning it's been set as something that can be duplicated really quickly. Here is a child project, and the child project says that CT smoke, which is on a repository on the testing branch. If I have a feature branch, a bug branch, a development branch, whatever that's on the same repository, can just call the Slack duplicate project CT smoke on the new branch, and it will automatically be onboarded as a new project with itself, its own status. And if you want to send files to be translated from here, you'll just say translate for this particular one here. The very first thing that you may want to do is just have a look at the translation status. This is a translation status for a project that's been onboarded. And you can see that right now there are 3 files remaining, 1900 words, keys, 9,000 words for French, German, and Spanish. So this is a very quick way for developers to interact with the system, but also localization folks and developers to talk about the same things in the same channels, if you want, in Slack. At the same time, the ability to check the status, the ability to go to the dashboard directly for this particular one by clicking here, the ability to send files to be translated from a specific branch. Everything is pretty easy. It's just a few things there. So I'm going to close this one. And now I just wanted to show you what in context looks like in terms of the translation. And I think it's over here. We have a partner. We have a lot of partners in terms of TMSs. One of them allows us to do things for demos. So here is something that's the Rebel Outfitters type of things, where we have a demo kind of application that's called Rebel Outfitters. And if I click here, I'm going to go to the actual project for translation to translate the Rebel Outfitters properties file from English to French. And there may be only a delta. Maybe there are a few strings that have been added or modified since the last time it was sent for translation. So again, if you have 100,000 strings to be translated, but only 8 strings have been added, we will send 8 strings to be translated. And here, if I click here, I'm going to open the workbench in that instance. And what happens? How do I see the context? Total is something to be translated from English to French. I just went to the total line, and it's highlighted here, and it's the context of that. If I want to go to the next one, I'm just going to do down arrow. Here's a down arrow or a tab. And I'm going to go to status. Here is status to be translated. It's right there. All vehicle is the next one. I'm going to tab. There it is, or I can click there. All vehicles is there. And I'm going to click here and go to the next one, which is this one, and then the next one, which is that one. So you can see every time, and you may have to, you may have to go like this in order to see exactly this, or you may actually open the URL in another window if you have 2 screens, or if you want to see that in a different window as opposed to the list of left and right things to be translated from English to French, for example. So that's in context translation. That's for web applications that we have that. I just want to be precise, it's for web applications. And then in addition to that, once translations have been done, you can use Localizer QA to have a validation of the translation by either the same LSP or by an in-country group that says an application specialist maybe, or maybe by somebody in a purely linguistic QA team who has that job, that really specific job here. So let me go find this here. Localizer QA looks like this if you log in as a linguist, not as a manager. So as a linguist, let me see if I'm still logged in, because sometimes I get logged out. Yeah, I've logged out. I'm going to be Frank, who translates for French from, or rather reviews the French translation. And Frank can do things that were in English. He can check the French translation. This is what this means here. And in that instance, he's got one task that's assigned to him. It could be 10. Right there, there's only one. And it's for the application Rebel Outfitters. It's to review Sprint 8, check the droids. And if he doesn't want to do it, he says end claim, and the manager will have something to say, well, let's assign that to somebody else as part of the planetary linguist set of linguists or reviewers. I want to click here, and you see that there are, first of all, there's a directive here. The directive says, go here. So I'm just going to go there. And then check the droids or follow the directives here, 2 droids, blah, 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 and check whatever. If you want, you can check only the pages of droids, but maybe you actually want to go to accueil, véhicule, or something else. Maybe you want to check the history code, the command history. But let's say that I'm looking at this and I don't like maybe 3PO ambassador here. So that's in French, right? 3PO ambassador, that's the current translation. I'm going to go over here. That's the current one right here. And I could type that in if it were in a different device or something else. I just want, I don't know what actually, 3. I can type that even better. P0 mediator, something. Yeah. Mediator. There we go. And it's asked me for an identifier. That identifier is something that Localizer will know exactly what to do with it. So in order to go to that, I need to shift to locale, and that's the real key. And that's that locale is provided automatically by LingoPort. Just want to say that. And you see 8663 in English. It was 3PO, by the way. So you see what 3PO ambassador, which was the French, was translated from, and it was 3PO. So you can already see that the translation was not that great. And maybe I would only want 3PO, by the way, but I'm going to keep that. So Control V. I could add a comment. Maybe it's a global replace everywhere where I have 3PO ambassador. I wanted to do that, or maybe just that one. So let's say it's just that key value. I want to say add, and at that point, I could have a lot more things here. I mean, I'm not going to spend too much time on this here. But let's say that you have 10 or 15 of those such corrections that you come back tomorrow, you're happy with them. Here, I'm just going to select this one and submit it. When I submit it, it goes to a correction page. So I'm going to go to the correction page. That's the page of things that have been corrected, and by me, by Frank. And you see information, médiateur, and you see that there is a waiting return here, and this one is being processed. So in this mini demo here, where I'm going really quickly, it actually is being updated directly, or it has an error like this. So the key is wrong. I did the wrong key for CPO ambassador here. It may not have been 8663, maybe it was something else. So it's telling me that I did something wrong here as the localizer QA person. So I thought it was this one, and maybe I mistyped something. Otherwise, it's going to go like this, for example, and it's going to tell me you changed this, and this is the change that was made in the repo. So if everything is good, I have a link that will take me to the repo. I may not have access to it, by the way, but if I have a communication with the dev team and they want to know why did you do that, or whatever, you see that there is a commit from Localizer QA posted it by Frank, which is that commit that changed this quantité information by quantité d'information, which is correct French, I'm going to say. And so at that point, it was sent back directly because of this change by Frank. It was moved back, directly in the repository, in the right directory, source content FRFR in the right file, string.json in the right key, des1 in the right branch, trials for the right Lingoport Rebel outfitter. So it's super precise in terms of things. So if there is an error, things don't get changed. If there is no errors, things get moved, and get moved very precisely in terms of where the application is supposed to pick up those keys. And at that point, the description one here, quantité d'information, that should now be part of this one here. And so if I go back to French over there, linguistic reviewer, I'm going to go back to French right there. And I'm going to have a quantité d'information somewhere. And so if I like this, if I'm verifying this, then I'm going to go to Localizer QA and say, okay, I verified and I'm good. And at that point, it's going to change this to a green. So this time I'm complete with the change that I wanted to make. I've validated it on the actual interface where I first saw it, and I'm now, the loop is complete. Not only have I affected the change has been in the repo, it's been deployed, and I have validated that, yes, this is what I wanted to happen. So that's, I'm going to stop here. This is what I wanted to chat about today. Adam, back to you.
Thank you, Olivier. That's great. I'm going to get my screen back going. Click here. All right, so we're into the questions. This is the questions part, and I'm trying to get back my screen. Oh well, I don't want to get hung up on that and poking around in the UI. I should know how to do this in my sleep. All right, so I want to go through a few questions here, and my last screen just has our contact information, but you should have that. You probably all have plenty of email from me here. So we got some really good questions here. We also get some nice hello from people here, and I want to acknowledge that. All right, so the first question is really a process question. That is pseudo-localization. It's a great practice to detect IATN issues early, but who inspects the result, the dev team or a centralized localization team? So there's what I think, and there might be the reality of your organization. unequivocally, I will say that the dev team should be inspecting pseudo-localization. They should do that as part of their unit test routines, because US English is just another locale. That is literally how we do things here at Lingoport, how some of our customers can do it, but I recognize that what we say should be the way, and the reality in many organizations are not the same. So at the very least, teach your QA teams to use pseudo-localization so that your QA teams can say, oh, English is just another locale, and I need to look for these things. These are very clear parameters that QA teams can really chew on and they can really go far with, right? If you have to do it with your localization team, understand that that's yet another human body supporting many, many people. So I would say that pseudo-localization is less desirable if your localization team has to do it. You're also one step further out of the normal flow of what developers do, unless you can get in there, and then it might not be a problem. But again, I think getting developers to just run a unit test as part of what they do is great. And second of all, if you have to go to the QA team, go to the QA team regardless. And lastly, localization team filling in where you know, if you're really stuck. Okay, next question. I'm trying to go fast here because I'm almost out of time. I'm going to probably go a little over. My apologies, because I talk too much. All right, so refactoring happens a lot. Say migration, all localizable resources from one place to another, converting JavaScript code to TypeScript globally, or replacing style of certain placeholders in source, and so on. It is always a high cost. Do you have best practice with your tool to handle such cases? Well, certainly what we like to see is that transforms become automated so that they don't have a high cost, that it's just a pass-through. And that is something that Localizer provides. Olivier, you probably can add a lot more specificities here.
Yeah. So what the question points to is not necessarily transforms. It's more moving files from one directory and from JavaScript, for example, for TypeScript. So what will happen, first of all, is we have a way to specify in a fairly generic fashion what are the files that need to be handled by Localizer throughout your repository. What are the extensions that we're looking for? What are the parameter forms, if you want, the patterns that you are using for your parameters? So if you change parameters, you'll add maybe a resource file type, and you'll add maybe a new parameter style if you want. So part of Localizer is handling all of that, actually. If transforms are needed, if you really go with something that's not supported, like you go from JSON, for example, to something that's going to be really strange, like that text file that Adam was showing earlier, where it's not supported by TMSs and no one really knows how to translate that. So, but typically, yeah, and actually, Family Search, the genealogy application that we're showing earlier, they are moving things from one repository to another quite often, or even in the same repository from one directory to another. So that's something that we are, that's something that we handle routinely, I'm going to say.
All right, thank you, Olivier. All right. Next question, the in-context translation platform for web applications is wonderful. Ooh, thank you. You have it for iOS and Android, maybe using an emulator. There's a sort of a distinction that's fairly confusing. There's in-context, which passes the view of the translation to TMS or in some cases even Translator Workbench. That is one product, and then there is Localizer QA, which is different. That's the last thing Olivier showed, and that happens outside of any translator workbench, lastly. So the last one, the localizer QA, doesn't care whether you're on a web browser, a desktop, a mobile target, whatever it may be. Unfortunately, when it comes to the in-context part that pushes it up to a TMS, there is a dependency on being a web app for that content. It has to, there are some blockers in terms of how that works, but we set out with Localizer QA to be good everywhere. So you can make those corrections after the translation in context right away from any screen, whether it's mobile or, I mean, you can do it on a Sony PlayStation for all we care. So it works fine. So I think we're good there. So I hope that's clear. It is a little confusing before different projects. Here's this last question. You mentioned microservices, but I didn't really see how Localizer could support a dozen teams providing content in hundreds of repositories with different repository structures and different file formats. We may not have shown that, but that is actually a common situation. Olivier, can you describe microservices support?
It's pretty much the support like for any repo. So if you have a microservice that are, let's say properties, because microservices may be Java on the back end, you have some properties, and you have a certain form to doing that. If you have hundreds of them, you can duplicate the project from one type of repo, and then kind of duplicate the same configuration to those same type of repos in the same category. So for us, it's just a localizer project. It's really nothing special, actually.
Right. Thank you, Olivier. All right, so I've run out of time, and unfortunately, we've gotten through the questions. So I think we're in good shape. Excellent questions, really adds to the project. If you have a question that I didn't get to, by all means, write to me, adam@lingoport.com. Works fine. It's a little slow to do this, but just changing the screen. Here's all of our contact information. And we'd love to talk with you about your situation, whatever it may be. What happens for every customer is they have their unique situations that make whatever they need kind of special. And we're very used to that. Happy to talk in detail about that. Take care and have a great Thursday, everyone, and a great Friday and a great weekend. Bye-bye.